Alright, so it's been about 2 weeks since I did my last update, a little over 2 weeks. And I'm not done, but I'm closer. I've been working on stuff, so I figured I'd give you an update. So one of the things I've been working on is my breech. So that's the part that the back of the shell sits on, basically, right? I think it's the right terminology. It's a breech. But it's supposed to have a firing or hole for the firing pin. Now, previously, I'd used another breech. There we go. This thing that was had a hole in it because I was messing around. That was going to be my test safety. Ended up not doing that, and but this was a 1/4 inch, which is too big, and it was venting gases into the T housing. So I've had to. One of the things I wanted to do is reduce the size of the hole, the firing pin hole, to 1/8 of an inch, which I've done. I've also been working on the striker assembly, and that is originally I had. Oh, I don't know where it's at. Here. So originally it had run. There was a piece that ran down the stock that was. You'd use this plug, and it has a hole in it. There we go. It has a hole in it, and that accepts, the firing pin, which was a 1/4 inch rod, and that would go down there, and you'd have a spring along the top. Oops. So you have a spring along the top, and then, a washer, and then a shaft collar right here. But that was the firing pin, so that would compress. And that was actually pretty strong. Let me show you what I have, and I'll back up a little bit. So this is the current striker assembly. Yeah, there we go. The current striker assembly. So I'm using a bushing, one of those breech bushings right there. And I have this little printed housing that I built to hold a shaft collar and springs that, in this case, I'm using kind of the Glock idea of the double spring setup. So I have a larger outer spring, and I have a smaller inner spring that I don't know if you can see. Hang on. Nope, I don't know. Anyway, so there is a little housing there that I'll show you. It basically looks like this. So it looks like this thing. And inside of there, we have the double springs, and the shaft collar sits on the front side here. And you have this little track where you can run a 1/4 inch rod down. That's all crammed inside of here, and it's kind of smushed between the two, the bushings. So I'm going to undo this real quick. So that one's only hand tight. I'll back that out. So the breech bushing is screwed into there. The shaft collar, when you clamp it on, really becomes like your sear deal. So let me show you real quick. There we go. Oh, there it goes. And that becomes a good little, way to trigger it. As I have some clearance in there. Oops. But anyway, I'm thinking of scooping that back, and that becomes my little striker. And it hits pretty hard. Right up against the firing pin. So that's a good strong hit. I think that will probably set off a primer. Here's what I've been thinking as kind of the trigger. Is this works in here, and then it actuates that shaft collar. This is kind of what I'm playing around with in my head. Is this sort of idea, and this goes up inside of the T housing. Oh, go in there. Oh well, you get the idea. But that goes up inside the T housing, and there's a little, pivoted, that's a hemisphere. But that becomes like a way to get, potentially mechanical advantage over moving that spring. So that's one of the things I've been doing is having testing toys, like, and little things just to, like, get my mind working. So there's this thing. I shrunk the height down a little bit. So there's ones that are offset. There's ones that are centered. There's ones that are really offset. And I have these ideas here, like these semicircles that are bigger and smaller. these little sticks that I thought were like good, you know, potential triggers. And they're really easy to print, and I don't mind destroying them and modifying them. So I'll print it out. You know, these are, I think, the same, not the same thing, but you know, I'll just cut it off. No big deal. You know, this thing is a skeletonized T, right? That would not probably be safe to use, but I might try it. Who knows? I'll put it in a vise and see. Here's like another quarter, right? So that's the kind of stuff I've been, you know, I have around that I'm working with, and I'm playing with, you know, different ideas to help me see inside. I'll cover a little bit of making these things because I've failed more than once. Here's the jig, and it just has a hole in it for the head of the bushing to go into. So this particular one has a larger inner diameter. I'm going to try and see how much the epoxy is going to hold up to. And I've put a little a washer on the front, and on the back of it I'd scratched it up a bunch so the epoxy would stick. So we're going to try this one. We're going to try the JB Weld Clear, which is 4,400 psi, and the smallest inner diameter reducing bushing I could find, which was the it's probably a quarter. But that's filled up with JB Weld Original. I went on a hunt for epoxy, and what I found at the hardware store, Gorilla Glue epoxy, was 3,300 psi. That was the lowest one, actually. Loctite Quickset epoxy was 3,400. I don't have the package anymore, but I have just some plain JB Weld, the red and black original stuff, and that is 3,960 psi, and the JB Weld Clear is 4,400 psi. So I've done one clear, and I've done 3 original, because I think that stuff's more popular. It's all over the place. So what I'm trying now is to do just a casting of epoxy in this, and I have to create a hole in the middle of it so that I have a hole for the firing pin. And I got to reduce down this, you know, diameter. So what I've done is I've made these little jigs, and what they do is they take a 1/8 rod. I push that through there. Hang on. Oh, hang on. That was a little snug. But anyway, I push that through the bottom, and that becomes a guide, or a hole for the casting, a negative, positive for the casting. And anyway, so I've tried a few different release agents. I tried WD-40. I tried Break Free, CLP. And I've tried candle wax, just a thin coating of candle wax that you can apply with your fingers. And so far the candle wax works the best because it creates a physical barrier, whereas the oil and the WD-40, that's another oil, but those are much thinner barriers.
What I'm going to do now is I'm going to try and push the rod through and see if it will release. I need something to protect my desk here, so just use a little piece of metal and push. Hey, looks like that WD-40 did the job. Trying to rock it free. There we go. So this epoxy is too soft. I can pull this thing out of here, I think. Yeah, it's still super soft. So I may have screwed something up more than a little bit. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pick all this crap out of here, and I think I'm gonna try again with JB Weld. Had a rod in there with a bushing seated in, and I was trying to pack in epoxy around that, and it didn't work very well. So what I'm going to do, it's just hard to fill. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to get a little more creative. So I'm going to put this rod in just there so it's flush, and I have a stem at the bottom. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the bushing in there, and I'm going to pack it full of epoxy that way. So I think that's going to make it a lot easier. I don't have to work around that rod being in the way. And then when I'm done and it's full, I'm going to basically keep this covered. I might use some painter's tape or something, I think. Keep it covered, and then I'm going to push the rod through and make that hole. Oops. After I got that thing packed with epoxy, so we'll see if it'll set. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cram this in here and clean out the bushing and see, make sure I can get all the little bits that might be in there and any stray oils. That's not too bad, it looks okay. So I'm going to move these out of the way, move that out of the way. So here we go, here's my jig, and my surface is flush. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to coat everything that I don't want epoxy to stick to with a little bit of CLP. I just want some oil on the surface, and that'll be my release agent. So I'm going to get a little bit on here. I'm just going to put some CLP directly on here and smear that around. Let me get this ready. So I don't want any epoxy to stick to this jig, and that's nice and oily in there. It's pretty good. So I'm gonna set that there. This I don't want epoxy to stick to this face, so I'm gonna wipe that down. Just the edges here. I don't want to get any inside. And the same thing on the back. So I'm going to mix this up. I'm going to need something as a scooper. I'm just going to mix it directly into here because this actually works. Mixing tray, there you go. This is one of my 3D printed toys. I'm just going to use that for my mixing. Get that nice and well mixed. I don't know what the setting time on this is. I should probably look. Okay, so I don't have a lot of time to work with this, I don't think. This is quick setting epoxy, so yeah, I need to move. Alright, so here's my bushing. I'm going to try pouring. We'll see how this goes. So sorry, you probably can't see that too well. I'm just pouring that epoxy in there. Okay, and it's filling up. And it's full. Oh, don't tip over. So I think I need I need something else for this jig, something to hold on to it, like a base or something. Alrighty, so that is, it looks like it's level. So I'm going to go ahead, I have some extra epoxy here. I'm going to go ahead and push this through. Actually, let me get my paper towel. I'm going to clean the top off, and then I'm going to put some painter's tape on top so that epoxy doesn't have anywhere to go. There we go. That's nice and even. Well, here, maybe I'll just push on down. So I want to keep, I don't want that on my shirt. So keep the bushing pushed in there, and I'm just going to push down, and it's going to displace some of that epoxy and probably fill up those threads. Okay. Alright, so that'll do. Go ahead and wipe it off again. Alright, good. And I'm going to go ahead and wipe the rest of that rod clean, because otherwise it's going to be a real pain to get clean. It sets in 5 minutes. I don't know how long it actually takes to fully cure. I think it's, yeah, it cures in an hour. So I'm going to try removing this firing pin guide and see what we're looking like. So I'm just going to flip this upside down and push, and hopefully this will separate if that oil is working like I wanted to. There we go. And the epoxy looks okay. I'll go ahead and push that all the way out. I might just, there we go. I think that's the hardener. Yeah, it's the hardener. And this is the steel epoxy. So I'm just pouring this in a stream. Alright, so there we go. And now I'm going to push my rod up through the middle to fill, or to make the hole. I'm going to go nice and slow, and it's going to overflow some probably. So you don't need to go all the way out. You just have to clear it so that the top, so that you can, here, I'll go ahead and push all the way through. You just need to clear the top so that you have a little bit of something to push onto, and that you're all the way through the epoxy, because we're making a hole all the way through it. That's cool enough to touch so far. Alright, spread that around. So I'm going to try again with the standard JB Weld. This time I'm using candle wax as a release agent, and I'm using a larger diameter, just because I'm trying out this washer thing. I'm using a larger diameter bushing. And yeah, here goes. So clearly that that larger inner diameter needs a lot more epoxy. Let's see if I can scrounge out of this. That's a little bit shy. I think I'll mix up a little bit more. Need to punch through the top so I'm clear. Alrighty.
So there's actually no tension on the rod right now. So if I unscrewed the set screw, I can freely slide this rod back and forth. It's all in the compression. I want to show you the striker assembly that I've been working on. So I started out just trying to get a spring and shaft collar to fit inside there. And that's, you know, that's just started out, and this is my initial starting point. How's that? Then I moved to this so I could, and the idea was that I could get a rod in here, right? Get a rod in there, and I could pull that shaft collar back that way. So the problem with this one is you need two shaft collars. You need one in the front and one in the back, otherwise it's going to go out and go flying. So I added a top to it. Actually, this is the first one that I made. I made this one, and the idea was that you can cram in you can put the shaft collar and the spring through the back, and the front is for the firing pin, or the sear, right, the trigger sear. That didn't really work out so well. I had another version, so I couldn't get that was too big. Or sorry, that was too small to fit the springs inside. So didn't do that. So I added a longer slot to get the spring in, and that works much better. I can get the spring. I can kind of get them in there, but this ceiling was still too low. I think you can see that there. That ceiling was still too low. So I took that ceiling all the way up to the top with this one. And that worked much better. I was able to get the springs in there, but the problem was I couldn't get my my firing pin, or my trigger sear in there to pull the collar back. So I added a little slot in the front, or I took the slot all the way up to the top. And now, let me get these out of the way. And now I can get my pin in there, my rod in there to pull back that pin, and I can get a pretty good hit out of there. So this thing has two springs in there. It's nested springs, kind of like the Glock. We have this outer spring, which is about the same OD as the shaft collar, and then we have another one which is just slightly larger than the 1/8 inch rod. So the idea is, so this is my skeletonized T, so I can play around and test with. This is not going to be ultimately something that's used. But anyway, so this is where the firing pin goes in the bottom. So I'm going to get that in there. And then I'm going to tighten up the back. This is just my example setup. Ultimately, you'd have the stock coming out the end here. Alright, so that should be snug enough to hold that in there. So you can see that assembly set up inside of there. And you can see the shaft collars at the front right,